Yes, thanks again to everybody being here. Regina, good to see you particularly. It's always a pleasure to introduce our next speaker. Many of you, as you indicated earlier, have met him before. A native of Seattle, Washington, Mr. Thompson attended the University of Washington during the 50s before serving as a lieutenant in the U.S. Army. Thank you for your service. He joined the Society in 1964 and has held practically every volunteer and staff position within the Society. He helped build a strong membership base in Washington and Idaho. He even worked with the Seattle police in exposing communist activities in the city. That sounds like a lot of fun. He formed and sold 2 successful businesses, served on the Community City Council as chairman of the Chamber of Commerce and as a leader in the Christian Coalition. In recent years, he served as the Society's Director of Field Activities and as Director of Development. On October 21st, 2005, he was named the Society's Chief Executive Officer. He's married and has 2 daughters and several grandchildren. Mr. Thompson's a serious student of history, which we all appreciate and benefit by, and of the mechanizations of the criminal international conspiracy. Please give a warm Texas welcome to Mr. Art Thompson.
I like to move around a lot when I do these things, and besides I have to go over there to click the slides. So I'm going to hand you this. And if it gets too far away from my mouth, just let me know. Or you can't hear it. First of all, you quipped about Fox. But when you start to think about it, how many people are no longer on the air that used to be on the air on the major networks like Glenn Beck, Judge Napolitano, and even Lou Dobbs was gone for a while, but he learned his lesson. Lou Dobbs was the only guy on national television who was talking about the North American Union and the problems there. And at any rate, so he's back now and is a much subdued individual. Hi Kurt, how are you? Great guy. At any rate, the situation is if you get too close to what's really going on, you're no longer on the air. It's that simple. There are other personalities as well. We had one individual who wanted to speak for us, but he said, my contract with Fox won't let me do it. Well, now he's quit Fox, or they let him go, I gather, and so now he's going to be out speaking for us. But at any rate, the presentation you're going to see today is very comprehensive and gets into a lot of different aspects of foreign entanglements that probably most of us don't think about when we think about foreign entanglements. We think about a treaty here, a treaty there, but it's much deeper. And one of the things that we're going to do is ask questions throughout to kind of stimulate your gray matter, if you will. And one of the things that we like to start off with is saying, have you ever brought a product and then found that the product was less than what was advertised? I think we've all done that in our lifetime. Have you ever voted for a politician and found out that what you got was not what was promised during the campaign? Every campaign? It's endemic, isn't it? And it's a serious problem. And it's the same way with these trade agreements as well. They say one thing, but in fact, there's something else involved, and we're going to get into that more and more as we go along. But as we explore these things, let's keep one adage in mind, and that is that power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. We all understand that, but too often we don't remember that when we start talking about laws that are on before the Congress and that sort of thing. It doesn't matter, by the way, whether these laws are benevolent or malevolent. If they build government, they will automatically, in and of themselves, by the nature of man, build corruption. We got to remember that powerful government always ignores the rights of the people, and they will always accumulate more power until they're stopped. And even if they're stopped, it's rare that all of the power is relinquished back to the people. They always try and keep a little bit back. It's sort of the 2 steps forward, 1 step back technique. And the 1 step back is called compromise, right? But it wasn't compromise, was it? It was 1 step forward. But that's the way they work. The 2 steps forward are the Democrats and the 1 step forward are the Republicans. It's pretty much how it works. Except for once in history, and that was this gentleman right here, George Washington. He relinquished power both as the commander-in-chief of the armed forces and also as president of the United States. This man was not seeking power. But it's amazing how many histories today will give the impression that that was his motivation and his ambition, was to be the leader, to be the powerful one. You see that on the History Channel a lot. He said, "'Tis our true policy to steer clear of permanent alliances with a portion of the foreign world," because he understood the problems of foreign entanglements. Jefferson likewise said, "Commerce with all nations, alliance with none, shall be our motto. I deem the essential principles of our government peace, commerce, and honest friendship with all nations, entangling alliances with none." No one, period, nada. That last one's for you, Texas. Function of the United States government is what? And this is something that is rarely discussed when you talk about the function of the government and the Constitution of the United States. Its primary purpose is to maintain our independence. That is its primary purpose. Its secondary purpose, which we always talk about, is to protect God-given rights. But they never talk about the independence aspect of it. Why? Because of the program they're trying to institute of getting rid of our independence. Just concentrate on the constitutional aspects of protecting rights. And don't notice what we're doing over here behind the curtain. But to protect God-given rights are what? Basically, they boil down to life, liberty, and property. Government was not established to regulate business, form permanent alliances, or abrogate the Constitution. It wasn't formed to do that. But we see those things going on today. Let me ask some more questions. Since 1933, what government agency that was ever formed solved the problem it was formed to solve? Oh wait, not one. What government agency has ever gone out of business because the reason it was created disappeared? Now, some of them may have temporarily slid out of sight, but went and merged into another aspect of some government agency. But not one of them was ever dissolved. So, under that kind of a condition, what makes anyone think that our government can solve the free trade issue? You see, they always end up creating more problems. I mean, we can go down through a litany of different agencies and show that the problem has gotten worse rather than better under the leadership of the federal government. Didn't matter who was in control. This is the way it works. Let's look at government solutions for free trade, for instance, using free trade. If you have a poor economy, what's the solution? Free trade. If you have a poorer economy, what is the solution? More free trade. So in the case of a collapse of the economy, what is going to be the solution? Universal free trade. I mean, that's the government solution. What's the free enterprise solution? How about reducing the size of government? How about decreasing regulation and taxation? Don't you think that that would spur the economy? Well, we all understand that, but in Washington, D.C., they haven't figured that one out yet. A few have, but not enough. Ask yourself another question. Is our government moving this country towards socialism?
Yes.
Any doubt? No. So why does anybody think that our foreign policy would be any different? Because of the same people in the administration who are moving us towards socialism that are also getting us involved in free trade treaties. So why would we think that this free trade has something to do with free enterprise if they're trying to move us towards socialism at home? that maybe that's a clue that there's something else going on? If you look at the free trade treaties, only 20% have anything to do with trade. That's the way it is. The rest of it is climate change, sustainable development, homeland security, military, international courts, banking regulations. Those are the things that are in the 80% of these treaties. That's why these pages of these treaties are so long. NAFTA had 2,000 pages. You know, how about just simply having a single piece of paper that says, we, the undersigned, will not interfere with your businessmen trading with our businessmen? Really simple, isn't it? So why do you need 2,000 pages? Because they deal with issues that have nothing to do with trade. And the Constitution, the contract that bound the entire complex United States, was originally written on 4 sheets of paper. 4 sheets of paper about this big. Now the one that you see on display is on 1 sheet, but originally it was on 4 little sheets before they did the really grand job of writing that out. 4 sheets of paper to run a whole country. And they need 2,000 to be able to trade with Mexico. Let's look at the process of trade and trade agreements and then their results. Let's take a look at China first. What were the promises? We were going to get consumer benefits. We could buy cheaper goods, right? Our money would go further. Also, we would be able to trade with the new labor force in China, that they would become the middle class. That these laborers in China would somehow go out and buy their $400,000 homes and want to fill it with stuff. And that was the idea of this vast free trade, free enterprise thing. And, more importantly, trade with China would produce peace. Well, what happened? Our industry moved to China. Along with it, the jobs. China started to use, with the money gained, to buy up commercial real estate and building developments here in the United States. The Bank of China is now the largest foreign lender in the United States. And they are now discussing converting their foreign exchange reserves into hard assets in the United States. Right now it's in the low billions per year. They're thinking in terms of bringing $3.4 trillion into the United States to start buying up commercial property, food chain, that kind of thing. We've reported just recently on the Southland, the largest pork producer or processor in the world, they just bought them up for a few billion. So now they control the pork industry in the United States. The results, continuing, they provided money for them to build up their military. Their military was a basket case. You should have seen the Air Force that they had before we started trading with them. It was a joke. But now they've got a very sophisticated Navy and Army as a result of the monies that we've spent down at Walmart. They're also buying up strategic minerals in Iraq, Afghanistan, Latin America, and Africa. It's so bad in Iraq and Afghanistan, we went in there with our armed forces, and now who's getting the oil out of Iraq? America? China. We even are so gullible that we've got our troops guarding the roads in and out of iron mines in Afghanistan so that the Taliban won't interdict those vehicles taking that iron ore to Chinese smelters. We're not doing it. And it's that way all over. If you look at the work they're doing in Latin America and the loans they're making to Latin American governments, Latin America is going communist very rapidly. I invite all of you to go online and start to look at the political parties and leadership in every nation south of the border, and then decide for yourself what form of government these nations have. It isn't simply Venezuela. You've got Brazil, where you've got a former communist terrorist who is the leader of Brazil. The same way in Argentina, the same way in Ecuador and Bolivia, and on and on and on. Look online and see what these parties stand for, and these leaders, look at their background. You'll discover that Latin America, we're being surrounded by very militant socialists, if you don't want to use the word communists. And also to point out the idea that trade with a nation does not necessarily equate peace with that nation. We traded with Nazi Germany. We traded with Japan. In Seattle, we used to quip that after Pearl Harbor, there were still ships leaving the piers of Seattle to make sure that that last load of scrap metal got there in time before one of our subs sunk it. It was a real problem. Trade does not necessarily equate to peace. Let's take a look at the NAFTA situation, the promises and the results. We were promised prosperity. We got a lowering economy. We were promised more jobs. We got higher unemployment. We were saying that if we gave jobs to these people in Mexico, we'd have less illegal immigration. We got what? More illegal immigration. We said we're going to have better relationships with our neighbors. That part was true. They tried to marry us. It's called the North American Union. So it hasn't really produced better relationships except at the top, but not really throughout the system and our people. Another thing that a lot of people didn't know that NAFTA brought was the NAFTA Court. And that, now, Congressman Abner Mitka was not the greatest congressman in the world for those of us in this room, but he does love the United States. And he said if Congress had known there was anything like this in NAFTA, they would never have voted for it. At the time he said that, he sat on the NAFTA Court. Now this NAFTA Court supersedes any state or federal court in the United States. And there's no appeal from that court. You're stuck. Who here can name me the 3 judges on the NAFTA Court? I can't even tell you. That's how bad this is and how behind the scenes this whole structure is. You really don't know what you're getting into on some of these things. NAFTA also forces American businessmen before the World Bank's International Center for Settlement of Investment Disputes. Now, for those of you who really want to delve into this, go to the website that's the Project on International Courts and Tribunals. If you go there, you'll find out many of these things we're already locked into that supersede our Supreme Court by treaty. Another one is the World Trade Organization. Now, everybody that's a member of the World Trade Organization extends to the other members most favored nation status, okay? And they don't call it that anymore, but that's what most people recognize the term. Now, the World Trade Organization rules on international trade. Now, if we have most favored nation status throughout the whole World Trade Organization, and they rule on international trade, why do we need free trade treaties? Isn't that a replication of what is already being done in the WTO? Now, to give you a little history, the WTO started out as the International Trade Organization, and its architect was Alger Hiss. He was Stalin's spy in the U.S. State Department. He's the guy that put together the International Trade Organization. It went along for a number of years, and then finally it changed its name to the World Trade Organization, and we joined it in '94. And all members, 159, agreed to, abide by its decisions. The only way that you can overcome a decision of the World Trade Organization is if all 159 members agree. Can anybody tell me how many times that's happened? Yeah, nada again, yeah. Back in '94, when it was brought before the lame duck session of Congress to join the WTO, This gentleman here, Newt Gingrich, a decades member of the Council on Foreign Relations, whose primary goal is one world government, said, "I'm just saying that we need to be honest about the fact that we are transferring from the United States at a practical level significant authority to a new organization. This is a transformational moment." Then he voted for it. He just wanted to make sure everybody understood. Newt Gingrich gives great speeches, but his actions are awful. Never pay attention to the rhetoric. Look at the actions and the organizations to which an individual belongs. Tells you more about than anything else. Now, who benefits from all these free trade treaties? Well, the multinational corporations. The small businessman, the medium-sized businessman, they don't. In fact, the multinational corporations are always involved in the negotiations. So they help set the rules right in these agreements. And they set them, they pre-dial the whole situation so that it works in their favor. They're called stakeholders. It helps the international banks, not the private bank down the street, owned by a family here, in America. It's the international banks. It helps them. They are also stakeholders and sit in on the negotiations. It helps government because it sets up new bureaucracies and it sets up new courts, but outside the jurisdiction of the United States. And it helps build international government. Now, a lot of people support free trade. I'm sure our libertarian down at the end of the table there feels that free trade is really a great thing. But I like to put a word in front of free trade, and that's equitable free trade. There is a vast difference. This gentleman, Dr. Lewis Lloyd, in his younger days, supported free trade and worked for free trade, and then all of a sudden started to see some inequities. And finally wrote a book called Tariffs, The Case for Protectionism in 1955, and I wish the title had been different. But he pointed out 8 things that were absolutely necessary for equitable free trade. First of all, he says taxes have to be comparable. It makes no sense, for instance, to have trade between 2 countries and call it free or equitable free trade if the taxes in one nation are way up here and way down there in the other one. It doesn't work. The same way with a monetary system. You have to have the same monetary system for it to work, because this country might demonetize something, they might default, they might adjust their printing presses or whatever in relationship to this monetary system over there. So they've got to be pretty close, pretty equitable for it to be free trade. Uniform business laws. If you're able to do something in this country and you're not able to do it in that country, then that is not going to result in really free trade. The same way with business ethics. They must be the same. Because you can't have a country where you have to go and give a bribe before you can do business in that country. And there's a lot of countries like that. You cannot do business in some countries without greasing the palm of either the other business or the ruler of that country. It won't happen. You've read about some of those things in your newspapers. Wages have to be pretty much the same too, because it doesn't make any sense if you're paying 20 cents an hour here and $20 an hour there. Free trade isn't going to work. And the other thing is that labor must be able to cross across borders pretty freely. And the other thing is they have to have freedom from the threat of war, because war can really disrupt anything that you do in the way of free trade. And it all has to be enforced by a world government. So when he started studying free trade and realized all these things had to be in line in order to have equitable free trade, he swung away from being a free trader and became a protectionist. Now, I'm not saying we should necessarily be a protectionist society, but we have to be realistic about what it takes to be involved in free trade. Now, there is a place where this exists. Can anybody tell me where that is? United States.
Between states.
Those conditions, by and large, are compatible within our borders.
Yeah.
That's what makes us one country, isn't it? And that's why this gentleman supported free trade. Karl Marx said free trade breaks up old nationalities. In a word, the free trade system hastens social revolutions. See, he understood these things that the doctor pointed out. He understood what it took and how it will break down society if you get involved in free trade as such. Now, let's look at some foreign entanglements without the ratification of a formal treaty. We're going to get into your pet subject. Agenda 21. It all started in 1992 at the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, or commonly called the Earth Summit. Out of it, only one aspect out of it came Agenda 21. There were other things, but just the one thing that we're discussing right here. And it placed local government control under the UN through sustainable development in the name of protecting the environment. And most of you are familiar with Agenda 21. This was never ratified. Now, it was signed by George H.W. Bush, but it was never ratified by the Senate of the United States. But that didn't stop them from implementing it through the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives, or ICLEI. The name itself explains it. International Local Environmental. So it's an international situation over local governments. That's in the title. Literally hundreds of American local governments belong to it. And the work that many of you have done in exposing Agenda 21 has caused them to alter their websites, so it's harder to recognize what the problem is. And they've also now changed their name. It's no longer ICLEI, it's the Local Governments for Sustainability. So all the literature we put out, you can put in the ash can, you see. And when we had the three-click challenge to go to ICLEI, and then in 2 clicks you could go to the United Nations, they've altered all of that. So every time you can tell when you're successful, when you're starting to make a difference, the websites get changed. They actually get taken down in many cases, and they will even change the name of their organization, because everything that you've put into it has been negated, you see. All the literature, all the videos, everything that you've done now is almost useless, because this isn't what we're talking about. We're talking now about local governments for sustainability. We're not ICLEI anymore. See? So it makes it difficult, but it does tell you we got to it. We got to them. Let's talk about the European Union and how that came about. During World War II, Albert Speer, Hitler's economic minister, had a plan for a united Europe. And you can pronounce it, I'll give you the English translation. Anyway, translated as the European Economic Community. And the idea, the motto was one European state, one currency, and one central bank. A decade after the death of Nazism, the European International Socialists called their plan, guess what? The European Economic Community. The same name as Albert Speer's plan. The socialist governments of Europe negotiated the European Union. And all these countries had socialist governments. More than this even. And every time that they would negotiate these things and then they'd get the step towards the European Union done, sometimes the people of Europe would be dissatisfied with the socialists, and they say, well, we got to vote these guys out. So they vote the socialists out, but guess what? The new government never went back and changed what had been done by the socialists. They just kept marching forward toward the European Union. Sort of like getting rid of the Democrats and electing Republicans. Mr. Socialist, Paul Henry Spaak, said the most effective way to disguise their political purpose, that's people that advocate a European Union, is to conceal it behind a pretense that it is concerned only with economic cooperation based on dismantling trade barriers, a common market. That's how we're going to sell, forming a whole new country called Europe. The former senior official in the European Commission from England, Connolly, said it has now become clear to us that what we thought was a common market is nothing more than a project to create a European federal superstate in which our sovereignty, Britain's national identity, will be extinguished. They thought it was a common market. The European Union now needs new sources of capital to bail out the socialist countries. I think we all know that. I mean, they're in serious, serious trouble financially. They have no borders. And by the way, where do you think they're going to get the funds for this? That's why they're negotiating this new treaty with us. We're already bailing them out through the Federal Reserve, but it's not enough. They need more. If there hadn't been a partial audit forced through by the work of Ron Paul, we wouldn't have even found out that they were sending trillions of dollars into Europe to bail out Europe. We would never have known it. And it's only a partial audit. They have no borders. Now that appeals to a lot of people. Come and go as you please, why not? Well, there are real ramifications of why not. Because, for instance, the English have a social security program just like we do. Well, the European Union now has told England, okay, so people from Greece and Spain and Italy are moving to England to retire on your social security program. What's wrong with that? See, none of these people ever paid a nickel into the England social security program. They're moving into England to go on the social security program because it's better than Greece and Italy and Spain. And they're suing England in the European court. How do you think that's going to turn out? To make sure that England keeps this program up. Also, the French and the English have a channel. You know, the tunnel under the English Channel, called the channel. They've established fees on how much it costs to maintain that channel, and people pay to ride the train through the channel. Well, now the European Union says your fees are too high. You got to lower them so more people use the channel so they can come over and get on the Social Security program. So that's the kind of thing that's going on in the European Union, just in the matter of England. The interesting thing is they promised the people that they could vote on the Constitution. They let a couple of countries vote on it, and the people turned it down, like France and the Netherlands. So they changed the time out. We're not going to have anybody vote on this thing anymore. So they met in Lisbon in 2007, and the leaders of all the countries signed it as a treaty, signed the Constitution as if it was a treaty, leaving the people completely out of it. The parliaments or the legislatures or the diet or whatever they want to call it in that particular country had nothing to do with it. And then they just by edict said, we are now the European Union. And at the same time, the treaty subjugated all European states to the United Nations as the primary authority in everything. Another one from the United Kingdom, Natras from the Independence Party. The EU was sold to the British people as a trading agreement and has turned into a political union which is changing our basic laws and traditions. And this guy ought to know, he's the expert on communism. Mikhail Gorbachev, the last dictator of the USSR, he said many nations he called the European Union the new European Soviet. He went on to say that all of Europe, from the Urals to the Atlantic, will become members, including Russia and everything else. And they will all be part of this new European Soviet. The interesting thing is that in Western Europe, many nations are ruled by socialists. In Central Europe, they're ruled by ex-communists. You know, Merkel, how many here knew that Merkel was a communist leader in her young adult Yeah. Now she's a conservative.
Conservative what?
I'm writing a column for either the next or, I'm not sure which bulletin it is, but at any rate, I've written it and it's ready to go. Never trust an ex-communist. You know, it's, you just can't do it. As a leader, you gotta, you know, just because a person falls out with communism, for instance, doesn't mean that that paradigm shift educated them on freedom and liberty entirely. It takes time to study that stuff. You yourself know how much time have you put in studying liberty. And the other thing is too, that you never know if they really changed. And the other aspect is that they are so used to using communist techniques to get things done, they will try and bring that into your organization. And you can't let that happen. Anyway, I'll have a whole different speech. So now what do we have? See if this has a familiar ring to 1942. One European Union, one currency, and one central bank, which was what Speer was trying to do. It was just a falling out amongst buddies. National Socialism disappears, International Socialism comes in. It's the same agenda, different color on their shirts. One wore brown shirts, the other wore red shirts. Okay, now, we need to discuss another aspect of NAFTA before we talk about the trade partnerships. NAFTA was the first step for an initiative nicknamed actually, the North American Union. It was the foundation to merge North America. That's what it was all about. And just south of here, in March 23rd, 2005, we had the leaders of Mexico, the United States, and Canada get together and announce something called the Security and Prosperity Partnership, which became nicknamed the North American Union, that they were going towards this objective, and they wanted it done by 2010. They even had their own website, spp.gov. It was an official government website. And one of the things that you found out when you went there, because it had it all spelled out, that they wanted a common border around the entire North America. In other words, there was going to be no border between Mexico and Canada. It was just going to be one border around the Pacific and the Atlantic and Guatemala, and that was it. And they were going to have a common tariff for all three countries, but they were going to have common law enforcement and army. There was going to be interchanges between the police and the armed forces and that sort of thing. And they wanted to integrate immediately medical services, environmental regulations, banking regulations, etc. And again, to be done by 2010. One of the things that people don't understand about Obamacare is this. You cannot integrate free enterprise with socialism. It doesn't work. One or the other has to go. So how do you integrate free enterprise medical of the United States into the socialist medical of Canada? You see, that is its primary purpose, is to be able to comfortably merge these other systems into the United States, but we've got to change those systems sufficiently to be able to do it. That is the primary purpose of Obamacare. You heard that on Fox? We're kind of beaten up on Fox, but we enjoy it. The banking regulations is another one. The fewer banks you have, the easier it is to merge these banks into an international system. And that's really what was going on during all the bailouts and everything else. How many here have heard the term bail-in? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, you know what bailout was? Okay, the new term bail-in is not where you put money into the bank. It's where you take money out of the bank into the government by taking a certain percentage of all of the bank accounts and all of the savings and all of the retirement programs. Watch for it. It's already being done in about 5 countries in Europe, and they've got their eager, greedy eyes on the bank accounts in the United States. Word of caution, don't put all your money in one bank, okay? Billions. Okay, now, see, did I finish that? Yeah, pretty much. Anyway, this was called what? The Security and Prosperity Partnership. Now we have the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Simply put, it's a NAFTA for the Pacific. That's really what it is. And we will only be one vote in this partnership. If it follows all other agreements, the next step will be an attempt to set up a multinational government. Same way with the Trans-Pacific and Investment Partnership. This one is a lot more dangerous though, because it's not the first step, it's the last step. And this is an attempt to merge the United States with Europe in the name of trade and an expanded common market. Now here we have, and I've seen it even repeated last week, I've got it here in my notes. These are actually my notes, but I have extended notes in here. Carol de Groot, European Commissioner for Trade of the European Commission this last February said, a future deal between the world's two most important economic powers will be a game changer. Together, we will form the largest free trade zone in the world. This deal will set the standard not only for our future bilateral trade and investment, but also for the development of global rules. Hey, that sounds like free trade. Global rules? Here's another one. Out of the Council on Foreign Relations magazine, Foreign Affairs. In the broadest terms, a US-EU trade deal will allow the United States and Europe to maintain their sovereignty over global economic governance. Both recognize that their ability to set global rules will diminish as economic power shifts to the Asia-Pacific region in the coming decade. No one power will be able to drive the international agenda. But if they join forces, the United States and Europe can channel their combined economic weight to keep control of the reins of the global economic order. Free trade. Rules are not free trade. That's simple. Here's another partnership most Americans do not know anything about. It was signed on May 24th, 2002 by Bush and Putin. We are achieving a new strategic relationship, the era in which the United States and Russia saw each as an enemy or a strategic threat has ended. We are partners. And we will cooperate to advance stability, security, and economic integration. Integration. Not cooperation, integration. And to jointly counter global challenges and help resolve regional conflicts. You think you knew what's going on in Syria, didn't you? Here it is out of the White House. This is the way it looks. You can go online and actually read this thing. It's online. Most people never heard of it. That's how many here remember during the Snowden thing, when he was in Moscow, at the airport, and Putin says we don't want him to upset our American partners. What do you mean American partners? This is what he meant. People don't know about this. Go online. You can look up all this stuff online. Verified. Something to always remember. Now, maybe he didn't say this. It's in somewhat of a controversy. Did he actually ever say it or not? It's the truth whether he said it or not. In politics, nothing happens by accident. If it happens, you can bet it was planned that way. That's the way it is. People make things happen. I like to always quote this man, Mark Twain. The only difference between reality and fiction is that fiction needs to be credible. The facts that we bring you are rather incredible, aren't they? Another one. Marx and Engels wrote the Communist Manifesto, but they wrote a lot of other things too. Back in February 1845 in the Holy Family, they wrote this: the revolutionary movement, which began in 1789 in the Cercle Social, gave rise to the communist idea of the New World Order. Emphasis in the original. The communist idea of the New World Order. Now, it's the first time I ever saw these guys use it. Now, others in that coterie did. But I just bring this to you to show that, hey, here it is, you know, from the so-called founder of communism. He wasn't. He was a Johnny-come-lately, but that's another story. And by the way, for those of you who want to really delve into history, look this up online. Social Circle or Cercle Social. And its influence that came into the United States back in this time period. You'd be amazed. Very interesting study. Who else have used the New World Order since then? Here's a book, 1940 by H.G. Wells, War of the Worlds, all those things, history of the world, that kind of business. He was a socialist leader in England. The New World Order, socialism unavoidable. They always try and make you think that's the world's future. Don't fight it, it's unavoidable. So on and so forth. Castro said it in front of the United Nations when he was there in 1979. Castro demands New World Order. Gorbachev visiting Reagan at the Reagan Ranch urges New World Order. Soviet president calls for U.S. as partner to work toward goal. That's what H.W. did, signed the partnership. And he came out with this. I don't know if you can still get this or not. It's still the official policy of the United States government, National Security Strategy of the United States, August 1991. The foreword, a New World Order, signed by H.W. Remember, and you can Google this, go online, look up New World Order George Bush. You will find several videos of his speeches where he says that the goal of going into Iraq and a number of other things is to establish a new world order and empower the United Nations. There's this one. For 15 years, David Rockefeller was the chairman of the board of the Council on Foreign Relations, and in his book, Memoirs, he said, some even believe we are part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists, and of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure. One world, if you will. If that's the charge, I stand guilty and I'm proud of it. Wow. It's about 420 somewhere in the book. I don't remember exact page number, but if you get a hold of it in the library or start looking around in there for it, you'll find it. People wanted to get rid of Obama. He wasn't born in the United States. He was born in Kenya. Let's get rid of him. We want Biden. In the Wall Street Journal in April 23, 1992, How I Learned to Love the New World Order. He went on the floor of the Senate, gave a series of speeches on how we need to go into the New World Order, basically give up the independence of the United States and form a new world government, and then put it in a booklet on the threshold of the New World Order.
What date was that?
I don't remember when he put it in there, but it was after 1992. I don't know if you can still get it or not. It's got the U.S. Senate seal on it. I just don't know. He might not want to give it to you now. What do the insiders say about NAFTA? These are exact quotes out of the article that Kissinger wrote in the Los Angeles Times back in July 18, 1993, supporting NAFTA. He said it will represent the most creative step toward a new world order taken by any group of countries since the end of the Cold War. It is not a conventional trade agreement, but the architecture of a new international system. NAFTA. And of course, Rockefeller liked it as well. And you've got the Communist Chinese China Daily. They even use the term. This makes it more urgent. This is the day after 9/11, by the way. This makes it more urgent that the international community move to wage all-out war on terrorism by, in the final analysis, establishing a new world order that can ensure lasting peace. That's the war on terror, ladies and gentlemen. That is what's going on. They know what's going on, and they say it to their own people. Those of you who saw the research we did on this Southland pork business, it didn't pass the smell test for us. So we looked into it, and we went to every English website on that company, and it's a private company. Until we went to the Chinese websites and translated it from the Mandarin and found out that it is only an adjunct to the Communist Party of China, being sold as a private enterprise. Sitting on the plane with a guy that does a lot of business in China, and I was telling him about this, and he says only a fool would know that the Chinese government is not involved in every commercial deal in China. And he deals with that all the time. But some people are so ignorant, it can be right in front of them and they don't see it. Who's that guy at the end of the table that never talks? Oh, he's just, an emissary. Yeah. Most people don't know that most corporations in China, American, British, Chinese, whatever, have two boards. One that you see and one that you don't, that vetoes everything else from the PLA. Okay, so we have a Bush member who has established the fact that the official position of our foreign policy is a new world order. Organizations that support merger in Europe, such as the World Federalists, the United Nations Association, the Trilateral Commission, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Atlantic Council, the Transatlantic Policy Network. I invite you to go to the website, to the web, and look up Atlantic Union. No such organization exists today, but look up Atlantic Union, because it will lead from there into a spider web of organizations that promote this. Charles Hagel, Republican, as U.S. Senator, was chairman of the Atlantic Council, promoting union with the European Union. He is now our Secretary of Defense. You know, a very famous book amongst anti-communists was written by a Czechoslovakian communist leader called "And Not a Shot is Fired." And not a shot is fired. They put the fox in charge of the hen house. The Transatlantic Policy Network has U.S. State Department involvement. It has a congressional group working to merge the U.S. and the EU by 2015. 32 representatives, including John Boehner, are part of this organization. You think he really wants to solve problems here if he wants to merge with Europe? Just a question. These members have sworn an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States. And what's the first purpose? Is independence. Independence. And they're selling us out. Look at the organizations these people belong to. You're going to know more about their agenda and their purposes than anything they'd say in front of a camera or a microphone. Here was a picture taken with George Bush, the son, in the Oval Office. These were, at the time, during his tenure, all the living secretaries of defense and state, including the ones that held the office at the time. Every person in that room, except him, is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Now, his father, H.W., was on the board of directors of the Council on Foreign Relations for 15 years. To give you an idea. All he's doing is following in his father's footsteps. That's what's going on. So, we get to partnerships. Trans-Pacific Partnership, Transatlantic Trade, and Investment Partnership. What is partnership? It is a merger of certain aspects of the economy at best. And it is conformity to the points of Dr. Lloyd. When you're forming a partnership, this is what you get. Continuing, it is nation building, and in the long run, compliance with the authority of the UN, because there isn't a treaty or an international agreement we've signed since the end of World War II that doesn't give the United Nations supremacy and authority. Every one of them. Now, you may have to look into the body to discover it, or sometimes at the beginning it's right there in the first 2 or 3 or 7 paragraphs. But somewhere in that agreement, it gives primary authority to the UN. Also, it helps the World Bank and International Monetary Fund. It uses U.S. taxpayers' money and gives the UN financial power, but they're the ones that oversee all these international agreements relative to finance. Okay, let's look at something. We've got to move along here because we're getting, the time is short. But first thing we want to tell you is that our government is based on the idea that we get our rights from God. The United Nations is built on the idea that you get your rights from the UN.
Sounds like you're right.
The Universal Declaration of Human Rights gives rights, then states, these rights and freedom may in no case be exercised contrary to the purposes and principles of the United Nations. You have freedom of speech as long as you're not against the purposes and principles. You can hold freedom of assembly. You can gather and talk all you want as long as it's not against the principles and purposes of the United Nations. International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Article 4. Oh, that's a mistake. I've got to take care of that. Everyone shall be entitled to a fair and public hearing, and then declares the press and public may be excluded from all or part of a trial for reasons of morals and public order. What the UN giveth, the UN taketh away. Article 18, everyone shall have the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, but later asserts that freedom to manifest one's religion or beliefs may be subject to such limitation as are prescribed by law and are necessary. 21, purports to guarantee the right of peaceable assembly, then permits the state to limit this right for national security or public safety, public order, and the protection of public health or morals. The United States Senate ratified the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights with only 3 senators present. A few senators wrote letters of support or indicated their support. And when it was over, Daniel Moynihan said that the covenant will now become binding international obligations of the United States. In other words, they might as well just thrown out the Bill of Rights. It is a weakness in the Constitution, the only one I can see in the whole document. It says, the Senate shall ratify treaties, all senators present, 2/3 of the senators present can ratify a treaty. There were only 3 in the chamber, so they ratified it. That's how it happened. They waited for everybody else to leave. Everybody else thought the business was over, and then they held this additional moment and ratified this treaty, which is now the law in the United States, abrogating the Bill of Rights. I'm not going to read all these to you, but just tell you what these are. These are how they're involved in the United States, the various aspects of our society, and these are all the UN treaties that cover that. Fundamental rights, banking, economic and monetary policy, trade, industry, education, women, birth control, abortion, population control, labor, private ownership of firearms, oceans and their tributaries, courts that supersede American courts, agriculture, environment. All of these things are now overseen by the treaties that we pass or partially pass in regard to these items. Now, we've only signed this one. It's not been ratified yet. But the test vote on this was what, 46 senators? 46 senators voted against the Second Amendment of the Constitution specifically when this came up for a test vote. Oceans and their tributaries, we have not ratified all of this yet, but a great deal of it, because this not only involves the oceans, but its tributaries like the Mississippi, and its tributaries like the Tennessee and the Ohio and the Missouri and so on. UN. Okay, Does the treaty give the right to the UN to abrogate our Bill of Rights? Only a fool or an international socialist would say it was so. Let's see what our founders said. I say the same as to the opinion of those who consider the grant of treaty-making power as boundless. If it is, then we have no constitution. Pretty simple, really, isn't it?
Exactly.
Madison, father of the Constitution, I cannot conceive that power is given to the President and Senate to dismember the empire or alienate any great essential right, etc. They don't have legislative power to do it or anything else. Also, take a look at Hamilton, who was a political opponent of Jefferson. What did he say about it? A treaty cannot be made which alters the Constitution of the country or which infringes on any express exceptions to the power of the Constitution of the United States. They all knew this. Now, let's use some common sense. To enact a law, both the Senate and the House must vote for it, right? To amend the Constitution, both the Senate and the House has to vote for it, right? It makes no sense, therefore, that treaties can supersede the Constitution or the laws if the House of Representatives does not vote for treaties. Makes no sense. But we have an individual that served as Secretary of State under Dwight David Eisenhower, John Foster Dulles, a founder of the Council on Foreign Relations, who said this before a regional meeting of the Louisville, Kentucky American Bar Association. Exact quote. Treaties make international law, and they also make domestic law. Under our Constitution, treaties become the supreme law of the land. Treaties, for example, can take powers away from the Congress and give them to the federal government or some international body. And they can cut across the rights given to the people by the Constitutional Bill of Rights. Why wasn't this guy tarred and feathered? How do you like that for a Secretary of State? First of all, the rights given to the people by the Bill of Rights, they already had those rights.
Right. Right.
This is how it's done. I always like to quote this out of the Communist Manifesto because it tells you the strategy. This is before the 10 steps where Marx and Engels outlined how to communize a country. It says, in the beginning, this cannot be effected except by means of despotic inroads on the rights of property and on the means of bourgeois production, by means of measures, therefore, which appear economically insufficient and untenable, but which in the course of the movement outstrip themselves, necessitate further inroads on the old social order. Bad economy, what's the solution? Free trade. Now, it looks insufficient and untenable, but necessitates further inroads. Okay, so we need more free trade, and that's the way it works. You can do that with Social Security, you can do that with any number of programs that were started that looked as though they were going to solve a problem but made it worse, necessitating further things to be done by the government, which made it even worse, because they want power. It's the way it works. Free trade, more free trade, universal free trade. Now, I was talking with somebody beforehand and why the Democrats seem to be organized and the Republicans aren't. A few years ago, just a few years ago, the Socialist Party, the new name is the Social Democrats. It does belong to the Socialist International started by Marx, okay? It's semi-secret, almost 80 members in Congress. 70 came out and exposed themselves. And let's see if your congressman's up there. Let's see. There's 3 from Texas. Sheila Jackson Lee. There's another one on this page somewhere. Who? Okay. Yeah. And then there's one on this page too. Can't see it. Anyway, you've got 3 up here in Texas. Now they call themselves Democrats, and they run as Democrats, but in reality they belong to the Socialist Party.
Exactly.
And there's 70 in the House alone in the Democrat Party. They organize. They know how to organize. They're very good at organizing. The Republicans don't know how to organize. Because why? They're individualists. The individuals can't organize. They're like herding cats. You understand why the other side wins and they lose is because nobody wants to give up their individualism to work together towards a common goal. Because their idea is better than the other guys, right? That's the way it works. They use that against us. Abraham Lincoln said this. I'm sorry, I'm in Texas, but bear with me. Before the Young Men's Lyceum in Springfield, Illinois in January of 1838, he said this: "Shall we expect some transatlantic military giant to step the ocean and crush us at a blow? Never. All the armies of Europe, Asia, and Africa combined with a Bonaparte for commander could not by force take a drink from the Ohio or make a track on the Blue Ridge in a trial of 1,000 years. If it ever reaches, it must spring up among us." And that's what's happening, ladies and gentlemen. It's sprung up among us. We're being sold out by our own people. Now there's history on this, and I'm almost done with my book, on the first 100 years of the United States and how this all started. It's very revealing. And if you think that communism is something new within government or in the United States, think again. It's been here from the beginning and been well organized. At any rate, we must stop the proliferation of so-called trade agreements and then roll all of those that are already enforced back. If we don't, we're going to be in a lot of trouble. Now, this may seem insurmountable, but it is not insurmountable if enough people understand what's going on. Understanding is the first step to doing something in the way of an effective solution. And the thing is that we've got to point out to these businessmen that don't sell their birthright just for a good business deal. They don't understand what's going on. They're not enemies. They've been sold by their chambers of commerce and their professional organizations and everything else that this is a good thing. Free trade is a good thing. Think about it. It's free trade. Don't read the body. You haven't got time to read 2,000 pages. Just look at the title. And so they've been convinced of this. They don't understand what's in it and the ramifications of what are in it. Once we do that, then we will be able to roll this stuff back. And we produce a lot of tools, some of which are over on that table. We're producing even more as we speak to come out and cover some aspect of this whole business. And we just urge you to take these tools and use them with other people to create that level of understanding. Only when we educate the electorate will we solve the problems in the United States. I'm glad that you guys stood up to that fellow with the CON-CON. Believe me, there are millions of dollars being thrown into this CON-CON fight, and I'll just digress from the subject for just a half a minute to let you know that the left, and I mean that with a capital L, is very, very active in promoting the Constitutional Convention. And they're just waiting for the conservatives to get the job done so that they can come in and help. It's incredible. They're already trying to start alliances. They had a conference at Harvard University last year where some of the most leftist individuals in the country and certain Tea Party leaders were there to start forming an alliance to promote the Constitutional Convention. And it's a very dangerous situation, because they've sold conservatives on the idea that this is the way to do it. Now, for those of you who have this book that's out, called the Liberty Amendments, I want you to go to the 8th, I think it's the 8th amendment being proposed, and read what it says, and then draw the lines out. And ask yourself, will this give power to the federal government to come in and regulate all elections in the United States? Because that's basically what it's doing. Very dangerous, that one amendment alone. What's wrong with simply doing it the way we've always done it? If it is a good amendment, let's go through the process we've always gone through. Let's not get a bunch of people together and do what was done before. You know, we've had 2 constitutional conventions in this country. Both of them held in secret. The first one turned out very good. Depending on your mindset, the second one did or didn't as well, and that was the Constitutional Convention in Montgomery, Alabama. It set up the Confederacy. So that one was held in secret as well. In fact, votes were taken whether or not to allow reporters in or even take minutes. And the vote was no. So we don't know precisely what happened in the meeting. So these sorts of things can go on where the people won't even know what's happening. Just like these treaties, by the way. These treaties are being negotiated and drawn up and are only going to be given to the Congress days, hopefully, before they even are allowed to vote on them. They're not going to have time to read these things. Just like the Patriot Act. There wasn't a single congressman that read that whole thing. NAFTA, they didn't read the whole thing, 2,000 pages. Are you crazy? No congressman's going to sit behind his desk and read that whole thing. He's going to give it to his staff, and the staff is going to go through 3 pages, fall asleep right on the thing, and come back and say, fine. And so that's the way these things work. And they make them so ponderous and convoluted English and everything else, so you really don't understand. Nobody knew, for instance, there was a court system in that NAFTA treaty. Even after they read that particular part, it didn't become apparent. And keep another thing in mind, it is not the individuals who pass these laws and treaties and agreements that are going to make the regulations. You know, the original bill for Obamacare was this high. 2,500 pages, something like that.
Yeah.
Now, how many pages are the regulations? What was the last 14,000? Huh? Yeah, so that's what happens. It's who interprets this, not who passes it, that counts. And so it can get out of hand. Anyway, time is short. You guys want to get going? I want to get going. And so thank you very much for your attention. I hope you've learned a little something more about this than you did before.
Answer questions, please make them short.
Any questions?
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
I mean, really what you're describing with these partnership agreements is just global fascism. We have, multinational corporations that are taxed at 5%, small, medium-sized businesses in the U.S. are taxed at 30% plus. Doesn't it, for them to perfect this, doesn't it really, they have to have a financial system that continues to function, and the financial system is basically on the verge of collapsing. You have these countries in Europe, for example, with debt to GDP of 500%, and you include their unfunded liabilities, we're at 400 or 500%. So isn't the answer, the solution to dismember all of this to just reset the banking system?
Well,
not in the way that they want, but in a way
sure.
that we would.
The only thing that I would say in regard to that is I don't like the word system. There shouldn't be a system. There is real money. Yeah, you're going to have banks and you're going to have letters of credit and that sort of thing, but to have a system within a country is a very dangerous thing in and of itself. We found that out off and on to our chagrin in our history. But if you have intrinsic metal, like gold and silver, and that's your rate of exchange, and you can have private banks that deal with that as letters of credit, then you're going to have a free system. Now, there's always going to be inequities in that kind of thing. But I would rather have those inequities than one big inequity run by the government. You brought up the term fascism. I'd like to say this about fascism. It's sometimes being called corporatism these days. Fascism is an unstable form of government. Why do I say that? The reason is that fascism is a wedding between the industry and businesses and the government. The big businesses, the big industry, and so on and so forth. That works until the government gets so much power that the government can just yank those businesses away and say, too bad. A good example is Adolf Hitler. When he first became Chancellor of Germany, a fascist system, he went hand in hand to the industrialists to get their acquiescence to his leadership of the German government. Within less than 10 years, he had so much power, he told the industrialists what to do. And if they didn't like it, they could go join the labor battalions in Buchenwald or some other place. And so what it is a lot of these corporations will cooperate in the way of eliminating competition, for instance. But that gives power to the government by creating those regulations in the process. Okay, you with me on that? All right, once those regulations become overpowering and become total, then government just simply nationalizes the businesses. They don't need those fellows anymore. And they didn't realize that they helped bring that totalitarianism about by Weyerhaeuser and Georgia Pacific and other companies getting rid of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of small sawmills in this country. When I was a boy in Washington State, you couldn't go around a curve in a road without seeing a teepee. They were the old galvanized steel with mesh on top, where an independent logger was out logging, bringing in the logs, sawing them up, and burning the slag in that teepee. And the mesh was on top to make sure the sparks didn't get out and start forest fires. There were literally hundreds in my state alone. New regulations came along, wiped out all those people, and Weyerhaeuser, they loved it, because they could live with the regulations, and then they hiked up the price on lumber to make up for it. But their competition was gone. And that will be happening more and more, only on a larger scale. You saw it happen in the banking industry. Hundreds of banks were wiped out in this country. The next wave will do the same. And it's all irrepressibly moving towards fewer and fewer and fewer until the government will just simply take over the one or two that are left. I'm talking about that in the December bulletin relative to food. It's a dangerous thing that's going on in our country right now. Most people don't even give it a second thought. But our food chain is under great threat right now. And you get your cart at any time of the day or night, any day of the week, and go down and push it down the aisle, and you don't give it a second thought about not finding what you want at that local supermarket. Not only finding what you want, but the myriad of brands and styles and everything else of that particular product. It right now is going through a stage of where, if it continues, that food chain will come under serious control by government and outside communist factors. It's becoming a serious problem. Yeah, Kurt.
Yes, earlier you were talking about foreigners purchasing real estate, primarily Chinese investments in commercial real estate.
Yeah.
Have you been looking into some of the other aspects of real estate transfers that happened during these recent foreclosures of the last few years? Because I know that I tried in both Chicago and here in Texas to try to get a list of bank-owned properties and was unable to get it while foreigners were buying our real estate on the cheap. I don't know if you know of anybody else where the banks have been...
No, it's all over the country that way. It's all over the country that way. I hear stories everywhere, Kurt, of that problem. You can't go down and buy a foreclosure and somebody from China comes in and buys 150.
Yes.
You can't get the list. They have the list. So something is very wrong in all of that. But that's just and it makes you wonder too, why in the world? I mean, how many here want to invest in Detroit? The Chinese are. You think that maybe they know something we don't? And I want to know why are they buying up single family dwellings? See, that disturbs me a lot. Let me tell you a story, and you guys got to go. Let me tell you a story. I walked in Yakima, Washington. I went into a Chinese buffet, okay? I love Chinese food. That's not Chinese food. It's Americanist Chinese food. But I like it anyway. So I go in there, and it's shaped like an L, okay? I walk in here, and this is where all the obvious local residents are seated. But over here is a long table, and there's about 25 to 30 Chinese guys sitting there. They've all got the same canvas shoes. They've all got the same khaki expanded waist pants on. They've all got the same little short sleeve shirt. They've all got the same haircut, and they're all within 2 or 3 years of age of each other. And they all stop eating in midair until this guy in this FBI uniform goes and sits down, and then they realize he's not an authority. and they go back to eating. And it was obvious these guys were illegals. See, in the Northwest, there's a lot of infiltration of illegal people from China coming in these containers. Once in a while they'll find them if it starts smelling because they didn't know you're not supposed to cook food in a sealed compartment. Or a ship gets thrown up on the shore in a storm and 350 jump out and, you know, way to shore. It is a serious problem in the Northwest. And then they're infiltrated out. Question, why? I mean, we're looking at the southern border without paying attention to the northern border or our coasts. I lived near Spokane, and the last weekend I was home, one of our members invited me up to have a great steak dinner. He was a cattleman. His fence line was the Canadian border, okay? So he gave me a map to get to his place. I never would have found this place otherwise. I mean, you know, through these old dirt roads up, and finally you get there. And as we're driving up, my wife and I are driving up to have Sunday dinner with him. These turbaned individuals with knapsacks are walking south. Now I'm saying to myself, I don't even know where these roads are. I live in the area. How do these guys know about these roads that can come across the borders? We look at the southern border, we don't pay attention to what's happening elsewhere, and it is a serious problem. What's happening with these Chinese? I had one Chinese gentleman tell me that most of these guys come from the provinces along the strait there that faces Taiwan, who are all involved in the Chinese militia arm of the PLA. They all had training in that way. Now, in my paranoid mind, I want to know why. So, you know, there's a lot of things going on. We know that arms are being shipped in the United States. That's a whole new speech. I've got lots of pictures that have crossed my desk of arms that have been interdicted coming from Mexico. I'm talking about 50 calibers, rocket launchers, grenades, you name it. One case, even an armored vehicle was in the back of a semi. Got stuck in the river. And so they pulled it out and it was just loaded. I mean, you could have armed a battalion with the weapons that were on there. Where are these things going? How many do we not interdict? How many drugs make it through without being interdicted? So we don't know, though, where these weapons are going. We do know they're coming in. Anyway, that's a whole different subject, and I'm way off the field. One last question.
What can you say about the Homeland Security buying so many arms and ammunition?
Well, the ammo part is contracts. They haven't actually bought it yet. It's mainly the promise to buy, if you will. It's a problem. I don't look at it quite as seriously as a lot of people do. I think it is a concern, but they don't have the personnel yet that will do what they want to do, if that's what you're thinking they have in mind. You know, just like I said the other day, look at what a Teamsters strike would do to the supply of food in this country. You ever thought about that? Yeah. The Teamsters are kind of hard-nosed guys, but they're still Americans and wouldn't do anything that they feel would give long-term, be detrimental in the long term to the United States. They just wouldn't. And so I'm wondering in the back of my mind how many of these individuals have been brought in to do what our American population will not do to each other. I don't know the answer to that. I don't believe for a minute that it's not being done, because there's just too much evidence that Hezbollah is infiltrated in the United States. Far too much evidence. And, you know, that's not a good thing. That was the last one, but go ahead. Women last.
I understand there's a huge influx across the southern border, particularly women and children being brought in for sex and whatnot. Things I've read didn't say where from, other than the Mexico area. Are some of those from China? And are we doing anything about it?
No, they're all from all over the world. What happens is this. The people are brought, you know, you hear about them paying the coyotes and others to come into the country. Well, how do they get that money to begin with? If they got that kind of money, they don't have to come here. What happens is it's a promise to pay. When you get here, then you pay the cartel back in services rendered or whatever it is, as a result. This is also a big, one of my best friends at one time was the head of the detective department in Spokane. And he told me that the Russian mafia brings people in at $36,000 each,
Wow.
that they have to pay back in criminal activity. A lot